Pardon?
In the John Carter books, people didn't wear a lot of clothes.
Anyway, but there was semis and big trucks and vans going back and forth constantly with the different people, and it was kind of exciting to see that. One of the characters came over, stopped, he was still in his makeup. He looked exactly like the devil, and it almost scared me. I thought I was going to ask. Dead serious, it was that good. So, for what it's worth, let's look for that on there, and that's what I was standing up here to try to tell you.
Okay, thank you.
Thinking about sort of alternatives to Mars as the next step. One of them is the deep sea. I mean, it's impossible we make out as far as Titan before we really get deep enough into the deep sea to know what's going on there. Then space colonies, a la O'Neill colonies. We might colonize something like that before we colonize a surface. And I kept questioning on how people can promote Mars. I mean, I remember some sort of introduction to ethics when I was a kid, but that if you want to be higher up, you can like stand up on something and put someone else in a hole. And they've demoted Pluto, so that's promotion of Mars by contrast.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, Mars certainly isn't the only thing we write about in science fiction. It's one of the things. I've certainly written stories about asteroids. I've written stories about space colonies. I've just finished writing a story about Venus. It's in the most recent issue of Asimov Science Fiction. I haven't done a whole lot of deep sea science fiction, but actually Mary has written some deep sea science fiction. So there's many things that people write about in science fiction. It's not all Mars all the time. That's a wonderful novel, and for that matter, Dolphin Island, another one of my touchstones as a kid.
I was talking to Mary at lunch today, and after coming to this conference, something from way back in the filing cabinets in my brain popped forward, and that was, I think, my first science fiction book I ever read, and I can't imagine why it hasn't been mentioned here already. I read it in 1955 or 56 when I was in probably second grade, and that was Miss Pickerel Goes to Mars. And I don't know if anyone else here is... Oh, good, another one. But the question, since this is a question-oriented panel, is, are people writing for the very young reader? Because well-written literature directed at a very young age, and here it would be second, third grade level, somewhere in there. Is anyone writing science fiction at that level? And there we go.
Well, this is Exploring Mars, the coloring book, so this is as young as you can get. I mean, if you give this to a 6-month-old with a crayon, they'd probably have a work of art on your hands. But a good question. Who would like to answer that, about writing for young readers about Mars?
I wish I could. And in your list of touchstones for young readers, don't forget The Mushroom Planet, The Wonderful Voyage to the Mushroom Planet. I don't think any of us up here actually are writers for young readers or young adults. I have a cousin who writes for young readers, writes for young adults as well. Although her books for young adults, some of them are science fiction, but her books for the very young readers are not science fiction. But I agree with you. I think that really is something that we should be doing, something that we should be trying to inspire the next generation. Marianne Dyson, who's a pretty well-known hard science and hard science fiction writer. What was I about to say? Before you said Marianne Dyson, I was about to say something. And what was it? Well, oh well.
Well, for that very reason, actually, the project that I'm working on now is a young adult novel set on Mars, which is based on some of the things that I learned at MDRS. I don't know if it will be published. I have 2 other novels that are making their way around the New York publishers looking for a home. But I think it's important to use science fiction to get young people excited about space and about Mars in particular.
Thank you, and I'm going to make one very quick statement here, a little bit off target, but I was also at MDRS 2 rotations before you. I spent Christmas on Mars. And one of the things that our group discussed was using that as a focal point for advertising Mars. And a thought that came up was a virtual reality television show based on MDRS, and then get the studios, whoever is doing it, to rehab that, redo it to make it much more realistic.
And every week we throw
of course-
somebody out the airlock?
Yeah, but you lose control, of course, then of the situation. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd kind of like to reiterate the importance of science fiction on Mars. I have hardware sitting on the surface of Mars, and it all got started back around 1955 when I saw Walt Disney's Men in Space. From there, I graduated to Tom Swift, and from Tom Swift to Robert Heinlein, E.E. Smith, John W. Campbell, and a little-known guy named Otis Adelbert Klein, who was a rival of Edgar Rice Burroughs. And in between there, that's when I got introduced to the first Burroughs novels. It expands the mind. I don't look at... I'm an engineer. Engineers are considered rigid, but I don't have that mentality. I've got a wide open... I think out of the box, and most of that is I feel is contributed to the fact of my grounding in science fiction. I want to say, keep up the good work. And you mentioned about what's the favorite science fiction work? 2 things pop into mind. The first one is, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, although a lot of people aren't, is Skylark 3 and Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Somebody mentioned earlier that we probably wouldn't be on the moon if it weren't for the Russians. Here's a plot. Construct a fictional situation in which the Taliban is establishing a base on Mars. That'll turn around the program immediately.
Wow. It's an interesting plot line, huh? Wow.
Let me just comment on that, because that idea did cross my mind. Actually, it was in 2002, I wrote under a pseudonym a story for the supermarket newspaper, as the National Enquirer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Osama bin Laden found on Mars. And I had, all sorts of quotes in it from, various NASA scientists with names pretty similar, but not exactly the same as many of my acquaintances. And then, of course, denials from the stuffed shirt bureaucrats. We are absolutely not prepared to confirm or deny that at this time. And and this and that, and all this stuff. And the piece was rejected by the editor on technical grounds. And because he told me Osama bin Laden was seen in Tora Bora 9 months ago, and it takes at least 2 years to get to Mars. And I said, no, you can get to Mars in 6 months. He said, no, I've read a lot about this, and it takes 2 years to get to Mars, and we have to run things with a certain level of credibility and rigor. And but I'm thinking of resubmitting it now. There has been time for him to get there, and there it is.
Wow. Fantastic. Wow. Excellent. Okay, next.
I just wanted to comment when you were talking about science fiction for kids. When I was a kid, Winston put out a series of novels by different authors that were meant for kids my age, in like junior high or that age. And I still have some of those on my bookshelf because I really loved reading those. Marooned on Mars was one of them. There was another one about Venus, and so forth, all reflecting the little that we really knew about these places, but it was adventure. And I still treasure those things. The other thing I want to say is that the Ohio chapter has compiled a series, or a list of works of fiction as well as nonfiction with Mars, and that's over on the free literature table. And some of that is for kids. We identified some titles that we saw in bookstores and whatnot. So check it out.
Very good. Thank you.
I have to say one thing first is that I am Unitarian, and what you said about Unitarians was correct. And you know, the old joke about Unitarians is their minds are so open that their brains fall out. So. But I want to make a comment too about literature for young people. When I was a little girl, I noticed that science fiction was not written for girls. It was boys with toys. And when I was in about the 4th or 5th grade, I spent my lunch money at book fairs every month for Andre Norton. And maybe a lot of people don't know that a lot of the women writers had to use names that were, you know, that didn't reveal that they were female. And everyone here probably has read a lot of science fiction. I mean, we're all interested in science and we're all interested in literature, just some of the books that you've mentioned. When years ago, I was doing graduate work at Wright State, and I wanted to do my, well, we had to have an author in a literary period, and I wanted to do Tolkien, and that wasn't allowed. So I chose Milton, so I agree with you about Paradise Lost. So. For a long time, it seems to me like science fiction does not get a lot of credibility outside of the people who actually read it, I mean, as literature. Now, have you found that that has changed over the years? And it has more credibility, and it's taken seriously besides just the fans of science fiction.
Mary's the answer.
Yeah, you know, when I was first was looking for a job out of graduate school, my dissertation was covertly on science fiction, but what I did is I took a whole bunch of speculative stuff by literary writers and did a thesis, and I called it something else, like The Literature of Paranoia or something like that. It was really science fiction. So when I was looking for jobs, I went to, I believe, the University of Pittsburgh, and they, you know, there's these old guys sitting around, you know, looking at me, sort of glowering at me, and they said, well, you know, if you had complete carte blanche as to what, you know, to invent a course, what would you like to teach? And I said, I'd like to teach a course in science fiction. And they said, well, what would you include in the course? And I started naming things, and I also named Paradise Lost. The chairman of the department got up, walked out of the room, and slammed the door. That was then. The last time I was at the conference in the Fantastic in Florida, I looked around and I realized that at least there, everybody there was open to science fiction. Well, not everybody, 80% of them were open to science fiction, and I thought, we won, by God. We outlived them.
Okay. Thank you.
Aside from some of the more recent juveniles, one of the earliest young adult juveniles of Martian science fiction, largely forgotten, John Keir Cross's two novels, The Angry Planet and The Red Journey Back. They were from the late 40s or very early 50s, and fairly well known and influential at the time. And also, though not from the normal science fiction community, C.S. Lewis's